Hi, my name is Cathy Mertz. We moved to Needham in 1993 and raised our son Noah here. While he was home during the pandemic, Noah and a few folks co-founded Equal Justice in Needham, which is an informal group of folks who are working toward highlighting inequities and injustices that exist in Needham and to take action. Noah inspired me to be more active in EJN and to run for town meeting last spring, and I quickly learned that a vital way to affect changes in policies in Needham is to become involved. In this show, we're going to explore how Needham government works for its residents.
Hello, and welcome to Moving Forward Together with Equal Justice in Needham. I'm the show host, Rachel Green. So Needham is a town with close to 32,000 residents, and I think it would be safe to say that many people don't actually have a clear picture of how town government operates. Needham uses town meeting, which is a form of government that has its roots back in the 17th century with the Puritan founders of Massachusetts. It's a form of direct democracy that's principally found in New England. In our show today, we will take a look at how Needham's government was originally formed, how it has evolved to what it is today, and why residents should pay attention to local politics. Our panelists have those answers for us. They are Gloria Greis, Executive Director of the Needham History Center and member of the Needham Historical Commission, Michael Fee, the current Needham Town Moderator, and Jan Soma, a community activist who wears many hats, including as a board member of the Needham League of Women Voters. So let's start with Gloria Greis's historical perspective. So Gloria, could you give us a short history of Needham's town government, starting with the town's founding in 1711?
Town meeting is the ultimate form of participatory democracy. It's really a almost do-it-yourself governance. The basic plan is that the town gathers together to discuss and resolve its needs and problems and finds the logistics and resources within its own structure. All members of the town, which of course in the early days meant adult males, would meet at need. And although there was a regular schedule, town meeting could occur whenever there was a problem to be resolved. And they would debate the pros and cons or the various alternatives and then take a vote. And then and now it relies upon robust participation. Everyone was bound by the decisions, and they encompassed public facilities, taxation, schooling, pretty much the whole panorama of town life. When the town was founded in 1711, it did not receive much from the general court other than its name and its blessing. So the only requirements for a town in those days were a church, a school, and the tax base to support a minister. The taxes were paid to the established church, and that was by law. And in Massachusetts, that mostly meant the Puritan Congregational Church. And for Needham, the first church, the first parish was literally that, the first church, the only church, the established church at the beginning of the town's founding. So the independent structure of town meeting derives in part from the beliefs of the Puritans and the other dissenter congregations who came to New England. They came from countries that were from, England at the time was sort of toggling between Anglican and Roman Catholic. They are hierarchical churches, and decisions for the parishes come down from the diocese. Congregational denominations are just that. Decisions are made by the congregations themselves. They agree on a covenant. They call the minister that they choose themselves, rather than having a priest that was assigned to them. So the Puritans were dissenting from that top-down hierarchy, both in their religious lives and their civic lives. And then town meeting, to some extent, also derives in part from pragmatic necessity. As I said, general court says, okay, you're a town, off you go, good luck, bye. Towns had to be self-reliant with their resources. They had to attend to their own production and infrastructure needs and their own spiritual needs and their own defense. So town meeting was the mechanism for mediating all of those needs and decisions.
So, what were some common kinds of decisions that needed to be made in the early years?
Town meeting is all about housekeeping. It always has been, and it always will be, because that's its role. And you'll sort of hear people complain that it's boring, but they're missing the point, because town meeting is not the state legislature, and it's not the federal Congress. Its sole responsibility is the welfare and maintenance of Needham. So a lot of the questions that we look at today were very much the same questions that they looked at then. Infrastructure, the building and maintenance of roads, bridges, buildings, dams, the payment of debts, fees, reimbursements, to pay so-and-so for supplying wood to the meeting house, or someone else to replace the broken windows in the schoolhouse, or to reimburse someone, who incurred charges while conducting town business. The taxes, there was obviously the tax to the church that was compulsory, but also they had to decide what the costs were going to be for the coming year, and then how to share that out. So they would decide a tax rate every year, depending on their estimate of current deficits, surpluses, et cetera. Then there were the elections. Elections were conducted in town meeting. So, as I said, do it yourself. All of the town offices were basically cycled through every responsible male in town meeting. There were a fair number of offices. There were not that many people. So everything from moderator, selectman, assessor, treasurer, down to, the various agricultural officers, the hog reeves, the sealer of leather, the sealer of weights and measures. These all, you just sort of rotated through these roles every year. So really sort of everybody had their share in governing the town over time. Also, town meeting was responsible for selecting the town's representative to general court. But most of these folks declined. They did not want to represent. They didn't want to be representative in general court. And Needham gets called on the carpet more than once in the 1700s for failing to send a rep to the court.
So did the American Revolution change the structure of town meeting at all? How did that affect town government?
It did, but not. I think we tend to assume that the Revolutionary War and the new Constitution sort of dropped a firewall between church and state right away, but it really wasn't that sudden or that definitive. Town meeting, as the 18th century wore on, was already shifting gradually away from the established church, reflecting what was going on elsewhere in town. There were new splinter congregations after the Great Awakening, and you're starting to see smaller gatherings of Quakers and Baptists, for example. So the church was starting to become less of a monolith. By the 1770s, the articles that reflect the growing revolutionary unrest, the Intolerable Acts, were starting to bring a more political, a more outside of town tone to some of the town meetings, especially as they had to grapple with some of these. The Massachusetts Act, for example, limited town meeting to discussing only local issues, and when that didn't work, town meetings in Massachusetts were actually suspended, and Needham continued to meet anyway. So you start to see that political aspect that was larger than just within the town. But the official separation really occurs in 1834 with the Disestablishment Act, and that severs the mandatory relationship that used to be the law in Massachusetts between the church and the town. It also abolishes the compulsory taxation in support of the established church, and that enables people to support the church of their choice rather than having to pay to the established church, whether or not at this point you were a member or attending. And then that allows other congregations. And that is the de facto secularization of the town government. At this point, town meeting is no longer meeting in church. It's using other public spaces. Retail blocks typically had a large second floor assembly room that would become the type of space that town meeting would then meet in. So that separation from the church, the separation from the church really starts in the late 1700s, but doesn't become the law until 1834.
Wow. Well, thank you so much for your expertise. That's definitely a lot of information. That gives a really good idea of the history of town government. Thank you so much.
You're welcome.
Cool. So next I'll move to Michael Fee. So you're actually the town moderator. Could you tell us a little bit about your roles and how you got that position?
Sure. Thanks, Rachel. And thanks, Gloria, for that summary. One of the things I love is the history of town meeting. And it's one of the reasons I became interested in. So I am town moderator, which is an office which has existed in a town meeting form of government since the pre-revolutionary times. And the moderator is a term, the name is actually taken from the Congregational Church. There's still to this day, Congregational Church congregations will elect a moderator. But the moderator's job is to preside over town meeting. That is to be the officer who maintains order over town meeting deliberations and proceedings, enforces the rules, and we have rules of parliamentary procedure, for example, that govern our proceedings. And so there's a formality to town, which is necessary because it is, in essence, a legislature. And it's the moderator's role and responsibility to make sure that it works, to make sure that it's accessible to all who want to participate under the terms of our charter and bylaws, and to make sure that it's orderly. And one of the most important roles, I think, in terms of making sure that things are orderly, is to make sure that we have an arena where civil discourse can take place, civil discussion of important issues that are important to the town. And those take place, as Gloria said, with the idea that this is all for the benefit of Needham. So for that reason, town meeting is nonpartisan. There are no political parties in town meeting. There are no groups or caucuses or interest groups at town meeting. It's just citizens elected from their neighborhoods who then gather under the periodic call to a meeting and basically do the most important work for our town. How did I get the position you asked, Rachel? And so I was elected town moderator for the first time in 1997. Prior to that, I had volunteered as a member of the Needham Finance Committee, and I had also served as an elected town meeting member. And it's probably important to mention at this point that the town meeting that Gloria described that existed in the 17th or the 18th and the 19th century, even part of the 20th century, was changed in 1935 here in Needham from a traditional open town meeting where every registered voter goes to the meeting and has an equal say, an equal vote, equal status, to what's called a representative town meeting, which means that our town meeting in Needham is a little legislature. It's elected representatives from the precincts in town who gather as representatives and bring their expertise. They voluntarily throw their hat in the ring. They choose to ask their neighbors for their vote to represent them at town meeting. And then they assemble. And we have 251 members who assemble at town meeting. And my job at the meeting is to make sure that all that works well. Outside of the meeting, Rachel, I also have other responsibilities, which include appointing individuals to certain committees in town.
Could you describe sort of what are the different boards and commissions and which of the members are selected? Are they like elected or appointed? What's the difference there?
Yeah, there's a lot of them in Needham. I mean, starting with, kind of the most important board, which I would say in terms of day-to-day operation of the town, which is the select board. The select board is the executive branch of government, not unlike government that everyone has learned about in their civics classes at the state, federal level, where there's a executive branch and a legislative branch. Here in Needham, the executive function, the executive powers are vested in a select board, which is elected by the town directly. Town meeting, of course, is the legislative branch. So we are the branch that makes the laws and approves, under Massachusetts law, certain actions that are recommended by the executive branch. So there's the select board. There are other elected boards, which are races that are run on a town-wide basis. The Park and Recreation Commission would be an example of that. The Planning Board would be another example of that. The School Committee is another example of that. Those are all elected specialty boards or committees that focus on one particular area. And then Needham is rich in its volunteers, and there are ample opportunities for individuals in town to volunteer and get involved with the committee. Many of the committees are appointed by the select board, and there may be committees such as the Economic Development Committee, which focuses on the economic development of our town. There's other committees that are appointed by a mix of authorities. So, for example, there's the Community Preservation Act Committee. That is an appointed body where various representatives from town, including myself as moderator, appoint members to that. And then there are some that are, for example, the moderator appoints certain committees exclusively. So the moderator appoints, and there's two of those, and that is the Finance Committee. And the moderator also appoints the Personnel Board, which provides advice on matters involving HR and other personnel and job classifications and the like.
And I also wanted to ask about, how decisions are made in town meeting, considering that there are a lot of town meeting members. Is that really an efficient way to make decisions, especially for issues like zoning being passed through town meeting? How are those kinds of decisions made?
Sure. Yeah, great question. And actually, I think history has shown that town meeting, especially a representative town meeting, which we are very blessed to have here in Needham, can be an efficient and wise decision maker. There is a process under which decisions are made at town meeting, and that includes the presentation of a question for town meeting on the warrant. And the warrant is our agenda. The warrant is what town meeting uses. It's a list of issues to be decided. And oftentimes those issues are recurring issues. They're ones that don't need a lot of discussion or debate. And town meeting is very efficient. I use something called the consent calendar, where at the beginning of the meeting, I go through our warrant and I call each article and I ask if people want to discuss that and want to debate it on the floor. And for many of these recurring or, routine articles, town meeting will enact them by unanimous consent. So that's incredibly efficient, because what that does is clear the decks for us to focus on those things that town meeting wants to debate. And those issues are then teed up. There's a process before town meeting where lots of information is distributed and gathered by town meeting members. And it's an opportunity for town meeting members, much like any legislative branch, to ask questions and to gather additional information. And if necessary, even make amendments and changes. And this is where Gloria mentioned participatory democracy. This is really the epitome of it, because you have just an average citizen, regular person that's from this community, who comes to town meeting as a town meeting member. That person has the power to propose that a decision that's going to be made by town meeting be changed, that it be altered in some way. And if the rest of town meeting agrees with that, or at least a majority of town meeting agrees, that's great. I think town meeting shows some great discipline, but nevertheless, they have the right to ask a lot of questions, and they do, and to test and probe. It's a wonderful, wonderful vehicle for accountability. These are all volunteers. These are people, every single person in every one of these roles, including myself, get nothing. Select board gets small stipends, but everyone is doing this just to try to make the town a better place and to try to throw their own expertise into the mix to try to help accomplish that.
So if someone wants to volunteer on an appointed committee, how can they make their interest known and get that to happen?
Yeah, absolutely. There's a vehicle through the town website where a person can notify the town. This is managed by the select board and the town manager's office and her staff that collect information. Serving in that way, Rachel, is just a wonderful way to learn about your town and learn about what it takes to run a town, which is a lot harder than it looks, and it's really the product of some wonderful donations of time by numerous people.
And I think definitely in terms of considering that it's a representative town meeting, I think you would agree that it's important that people who are interested in becoming town meeting members really, get on that and get that process going to get their voices heard.
Absolutely. The process is so simple. It's just have to get 10 signatures from, people in your precinct and you're on the ballot. So that 10 includes yourself.
Well, thank you, Michael. Thank you for your time and for all that info.
My pleasure. Thank you for doing this, Rachel.
Yeah. So we'll go to Jan Soma. I'd like to ask, why is it important for Needham residents to pay attention to local issues and town government decisions, considering all that we've just learned about how it operates?
Well, that's a good question, particularly since we have a strong representative government. Our town government can seem almost invisible if things are running smoothly, but we can make a positive difference in many ways. Generally, it's important to pay attention to local issues because our daily lives are shaped by these decisions in all kinds of ways that affect us, but we might not be thinking of all the time. If we don't let our elected and appointed officials know what we want, they can't govern very effectively.
What kinds of town government decisions affect the day-to-day lives of residents, and how can we influence those decisions?
The condition of our town lighting, our crosswalks, our roads, how we deal with health emergencies such as COVID, whether or not we have liquor stores in Needham. Town government decisions affect how we educate, how we might change racial barriers that exist in our towns, and how our affordable housing is developed. Outdoor dining was expanded by our town government in response to COVID, and so many people seem to like that and maybe take it for granted now, but that came from our town government. A recent example of what we can do to influence decisions comes when we look at the townwide discussion of zoning issues that occurred recently about the Muzzy Ford property. A sale is expected in the not too distant future. So this was an issue that the planning board took up. Lots of people got involved in the discussion. So traffic issues, density issues, effects on neighborhood. Several public discussions by our planning board were attended by many townspeople. Individuals and groups spoke up and provided written statements about their views. An initial plan was voted down at town meeting. And finally, after the planning board considered all of the available input again, a revised zoning plan was presented at a second town meeting, and it finally passed. So the final product was a work of many inside and outside of government. I think a good solution came from all of that collaboration.
So how can people get involved besides voting?
A good way to figure out how you might fit into the mix is to gather information about something that matters to you. You can look at the town calendar and sample different meetings. You can look at all the meetings are public, and most, if not all, offer the convenience of attending through a Zoom link or in person these days. If you cannot attend, most are recorded and you can watch what happened later. If you have a special interest in town, you can sign up for email notices to remind you when something you care about is posted. So for example, you can get select board meeting dates and agendas sent to your email. Another thing you can do is to attend public hearings about issues that matter to you. These have a lot of impact. The boards and committees and commissions listen to what people have to say. So if only special interest groups go to them and regular citizens don't, they're not going to know what you have on your mind. You can run for office, so that's important. We all have 8 town meeting members who represent us, so we want to be able to tell them what we're thinking, and we might approach select board members as well to make sure we have our thoughts out there. There's an interesting new thing that you can do. You can sign up to complete town opinion surveys. You'll be notified when Needham or local organizations need your input. Our public information officer, Cindy Gonzalez, is working to improve communication between us and our town government. And there is an application on the town website to be able to do that.
So what could you tell us about some non-government groups that are supporting our town government?
Well, I am a member of the League of Women Voters, and it's an important organization with regard to Needham, in my opinion. It's a trusted, nonpartisan group that encourages informed, active participation in government. The League conducts studies to consider whether aspects of our town government might be improved. Another example of a non-government group illustrates how the creativity of townspeople can support the government's interest in addressing problems associated with climate change. Green Needham, a local group that focuses on ways to combat our climate crisis, is exploring the possibility of negotiating a contract for a program where a supplier would offer renewable electrical energy to interested townspeople. If enough residents join such a program, it would reduce Needham's carbon footprint and provide a reasonable price for consumers. Another one is the parent-teacher councils and the Needham Education Foundation indirectly support the efforts of the school committee. Community groups such as Equal Justice Needham, the Needham Diversity Initiative, several faith-based groups and others are supporting our town's Human Rights Committee policy of diversity, equity, inclusion here in Needham. And last but not least, the Needham History Center and Museum keeps the history of Needham alive, which encourages engagement in the present Needham, including our town government.
Awesome. And last, but maybe the most important question, what and when are the upcoming local elections?
Well, there's one coming right up on December the 7th. It's a special election for an open select board seat. And then in the spring, we have our annual town election that's going to be held on April 12th, 2022. And this election is unusual in that it will include every town meeting member position because of the town precinct changes resulting from the recent federal census.
Thank you so much for your perspective, Jan. And I want to thank all of our panelists. I really learned a lot about how the town government works, and I hope everyone who's watching also learned a lot. So don't forget to vote in the December special election for select board, and maybe consider running for a town meeting or volunteering for a commission. I think there have been a lot of ideas thrown out about how you can do that and get involved. Please take a moment to fill out a poll on the EJN website about what we covered today. If you have any comments or suggestions, you can get in touch at thishappenshare@gmail.com. We'd love to hear from you. Thank you so much for watching, and we'll see you next time.